Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Avodah Zara Daf Mem Tes. Again, we're a little bit behind. We'll catch up when we're able. Today we're starting at a new Mishnah toward the bottom of Mem Ches Amud Beis. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, if we have enough time, we'll get to the top of Nun Amud Aleph. It's just a very nuanced Shakla. I wouldn't say that it's particularly difficult, but it does require paying attention. The back and forth is pretty significant. So let's get started. The Mishnah says 2/3 of the way down on Mamches Amud Beis as follows: Zoren tachteha yirakos bimosag shamim. You're allowed to plant under an Asherah tree vegetables during the winter months. Why? Because says the Gemara, since it blocks the sun, so the tree is causing a negative. It's not a hana. It's actually doing something that we don't want it to do. And therefore, you're allowed to use the tree in that way. You can use a tree in a way that's harmful to you, in a way that's negative to you. Avalobi mosachama, but during the summer months, the shade is actually better location because out in the sun it would get scorched. Chazirin, when we talk about lettuce, you can't use that under an asherah tree, lobi mosachama, velobi mosag shamim. You can't use it at all under an Asherah tree because that's actually where it should be. It should not be in the sun, more of a delicate growing food. So we know of these things. We know certain things need a lot of sunlight. Look at corn. Corn is wide out in the open. So if you put corn under an Asherah tree, no problem at all because you're actually harming the growth of your corn. But something that doesn't need to be in the sun cannot be put under an Asherah tree. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Af lo yirakos b'mosag shamim. He argues you can't even put something that needs the sun. You can't even put that there. Mipnei sheha which is actually what the word leaves is in Hebrew. We would use a different word in modern Hebrew, but hanevia no sheras aleim v'hava lahen lezevel. So if during the fall when we see leaves fall off the tree, what happens is that they sit there on the ground. Animals eat it up a little bit, and then it starts to decay, and then it actually is mizabel. It actually helps to feed and become part of the earth, and it actually grows whatever you're growing there. So even though, really technically speaking, we're blocking the sun, and that's not ideal. Okay, so therefore you're not benefiting from the asherah, but it's still usher because when the leaves fall, they actually turn into zevel. They turn into some type of supporting growth for that which is growing. So it says the Gemara, and now we're going to get into a big discussion about a concept called zev gorim. The Memra, does this mean to say that the Rabbi Yossi Sovar zev gorim aser, v'Rabbanan Amre zev gorim mutter? Now we have to talk outside for a second. The concept of zev gorim is where you have one thing that's mutter and another thing that's aser, and those two things yield another thing. So, for example, the ground is mutter. The asherah leaf that falls down and becomes part of the earth is aser because you're benefiting from an asherah tree. So that's zu v'zu, gorem, zev gorem, one positive, one negative, one halachically good thing, one halachically bad thing, and they yield a third thing. So, if that's true, then it would mean that from our Mishnah, where Rabbi Yossi says that even if the leaves will be zevel, that means zev gorim is aser because he holds that it's not allowed. So if he holds zev gorim is aser and the Tanna Kama holds zev gorim is mutter, that's what it seems like from our Mishnah. Again, let's just get the question clear. The case of zev gorim is where you have two things, one donating to the other and yielding a third. So you have, again, the ground would be something that is mutter. The leaf falling from the Asherah tree would be aser because as it becomes part of the ground again, it helps with its nutrients. It helps with whatever it becomes when it gets absorbed in the earth. It helps to have something under the Asherah tree grow. So Rabbi Yossi and our Mishnah held that that's aser. So that means zev gorim aser. That when we have a mutter thing and a non-mutter thing that are causing to create a third thing, so then it's going to be aser, and the Tanna Kama would be matir. Says the Gemara, that can't be because we actually have the exact opposite in another Mari Makom, Titnan. We have a Mishnah in Maseches. Oh, it's in our Maseches. We saw this 5-6 blot ago. Rabbi Yossi, who we just said was the one who was Oser, was lenient in another case. Where was Rabbi Yossi lenient? So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi Omer Shochek v'Zara l'Ruach o Ma'atil Yam. You're allowed to grind up an Avodah Zara and you're allowed to put it into the wind. We don't care what happens at that point. That seems to imply that Zev Gorem is mutter. Why? Because he says that even if you grind it up and even if it becomes part of the soil, we're not worried about that. So this is the opposite of our Mishnah. And what did the Chachamim say on Daf Mem Gimel in this Mishnah? Amr lo, the Chachamim said, Af hi na'aseh zevel. They argued the other way, that no, that if you're shochek and avodah zara and it becomes part of the earth, then it then becomes zevel, something that helps things grow. It's compost. So that's what the Gemara says, v'ne'emar, and that should not be allowed. Why should it not be allowed? Because lo yidbak biyadcha me'uma min acherim. Because the Gemara says that you should have no benefit at all from avodah zara. So our Mishnah made us think that Rabbi Yossi holds zev gorim is aser, and the Chachamim hold zev gorim is mutter. But the Mishnah from Daf Mem Gimel implies the exact opposite, that Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion that it's okay to allow for zev gorim, and the Chachamim are not. So the Gemara says, Kasha de Rabbanan ad Rabbanan, v'Kasha de Rabbi Yossi ad Rabbi Yossi. If you look at the diuk from our Mishnah at the open of the Gemara, and you compare it to the Mishnah on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis, you see this stira where Rabbi Yossi seems to be lenient over there and not lenient over here, and the Rabbanan are machmir over there and not machmir over here. So says the Gemara, no problem. Let me answer up for you. Last of the short lines on Mem Ches Amud Beis. Bishlama de Rabbi Yossi ad Rabbi Yossi, the stira that we saw in Rabbi Yossi, that in our Mishnah he seems to hold zev gorim is aser, and on Mem Gimel Amud Beis he seemed to hold zev gorim is mutter. That's not a problem. Hasam de ka'azil ibud matir. Over there, on Daf Mem Gimel, why was he lenient? Well, he was lenient because when you grind something up, it's really not sustaining anything. It's not compost. It's just holech le'ibud. It's powder at that point. And therefore, he's going to be lenient on Daf Mem Gimel. However, hacha, in regards to a leaf that falls off of an asherah tree from our Mishnah, hacha, de lo ka'azil ibud aser. Here, the leaf is a real thing. If leaves fall, there's someone on Chase Avenue who collects all their leaves in a bin and they put like a weight on top of it, and it's just they keep it there all year round, and slowly but surely you see the lid go down, it becomes compost. Okay, I get it. So that's the nafkamina. So the Gemara says, by Rabbi Yossi, I can make an easy distinction. On Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis, why was he lenient? He was lenient in that Mishnah by Zev Gorin. He was lenient because over there it's like a powder. You ground up the avodah zara into a powder. But with a leaf, that's not true. So we can answer up for the stira between our Mishnah here and the Mishnah on Mem Gimel for Rabbi Yossi, no problem. Ela de Rabbanon ad de Rabbanon kasha. But when it comes to the sheet of the Rabbanon, that's very, very difficult to try and answer. And the Gemara says, no problem. Epuch, switch the shitas over there and over here. Switch the shitas over there so that everyone seems to hold exactly the same thing, and then there's no stira at all. That's a possibility. Then the Gemara says, "V'ibai sema," or we can say lo tepuch, that really we don't switch it. The Rabbi Yossi kiddeshaninan. The answer that we gave for Rabbi Yossi still stands. And how can we answer up the shita of the Rabbanan, the stira between the Rabbanan, who over here seem to hold zev gorim as mutter, but on Mem Gimel Amud Beis they hold zev gorim as aser. So in our case over here, they said that they weren't so concerned about growing something under a tree. They weren't concerned about the leaves. But on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis, they were worried about being shochek and avodah zara and using it there. So Rabbanan, 5-6 lines from the bottom, Kedu Amar Rav Mari Bereder Rav Kahana. And the Rabbanan give a fascinating halachic svara, a little difficult in Lamdus. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it is unique. And here is what the Rabbanan would say. Ma shemashbiach be'or pogim bebasar. This was kind of like a colloquialism, a halachic colloquialism, where that which improved the skin ruined the meat. So what does that mean over here? Look at this. So let's get the case clear. Our Mishnah said that if during the winter months you plant zraim underneath it, so that's okay. That's what the Tanakama held. That's what the Rabbanan hold. So the Rabbanan over there, however, on Daf Mem Gimel were makbet. So now how does the Gemara explain? Yeah, over here, it's a little bit different. Why over here am I okay with the leaf? Because you're right that the leaf is going to fall and become compost, but it's offset by the fact that it's in a shadow. And because it's in a shadow, you're not going to get the same growth results. So maybe there's a +1 of the leaf being compost, but there's a -1 of the shadow under the tree. And +1 minus -1 is 0. So the Chachamim were of the opinion that even though it's true that you would benefit from the Asherah leaf that fell and became compost, but you didn't gain net because you're in a shadowed space. So I struggle with that personally because I feel like you would have been worse without the leaf. So the leaf brought you from a -1 to a 0. That's Hana. So that seems to not be the case. That means that his definition of Hana is budget neutral. As long as it's net 0, not an Isser Hana. I find that amazing. No?
It's very economical of it.
It's mathematical. It's mathematical Hana. If I can be mevatel the Hana, then it's no longer Asr. And really nothing will be gained. And really what he's saying is this is the belly of the beast, is that this thing is not growing any more than it would have grown if there was no leaf. That's really what he's saying, because you're right. Had it been perfect sunshine and a leaf fell, +1 in growth. But the +1 in growth from the leaf is a -1 in the shade, so therefore net 0, no growth happens, so there's no Hana. That's really what's happening. But the lumdus is a little complicated.
This is a little complicated. It's not that simple.
It's not that simple. But the way our Mishnah painted he gave a value of negativity to shade, which was the equivalent and opposite of a leaf. What if 2 leaves fall? Right. So that's why I said when I started this section, it is a difficult lumdus, but again, let's just try and give it as much as we can here. Like he's saying that there's an offset to the leaf. Something else is we're somewhat neutralizing the Hana of the leaf. It's not straight Hana. It's interrupted, it's interfered with, and perhaps that's a svara to be said. But that is how we would answer up for the Rabbana. Okay, so we saw there was a stira between our Mishnah over here on Daf Mem Ches Amud Beis, back to the Mishnah on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis. Now the Gemara wants to question something that we posited. The Savar Rabbi Yossi Zev Gorem Aser. Is it really possible, like the diuk at the open of our Gemara, where we thought that from our Mishnah that Rabbi Yossi holds Zev Gorem is Aser? Our Gemara wants to know, is that really possible? V'hatznan, 3 lines before the bottom of the page. Rabbi Yossi Omer Noten Yichur Shel Orla. You're allowed to take the branch of an orla tree. Of course, an orla tree is Aser to benefit from. The ein notin egos shel orla, but of course you can't take a nut that grows on a tree, a cashew, whatever other nuts grow on trees. Ibnei shu pri. Okay, that's what the Mishnah says in the Mishnayos and Orla. Then comes along Rabbi Yehuda Marav, Rabbi Yehuda Marav, and he says, Mode Rabbi Yossi she'im nota behibrich v'hirkiv mutter. He says that if what you did is you were mavrich, let's recall from yesterday, that being mavrich is bending the branch of a tree underground and having it grow up again on its own. That's mavrich. Or hirkiv is classical grafting. You cut an angle cut, add a different type of branch, tape them together, and then they'll start growing off of that branch a different type of fruit, a blended type of fruit. So he holds mutter. But why would that be true? It's zev zegorim. You have orla plus the graft. Should be that it's usher if you're a Rabbi Yossi Jew. So says the Gemara, how can the diuk of our Mishnah be? How can you say that our Mishnah means Zev Zegorim is Asr according to Rabbi Yossi? Hare, the Mishnah in Maseches Orla seems to not say that way, because he says when you're Mavrich or you're Markiv, it's still mutter afterwards, Afal Pi, that the Ikar of the tree is Orla, and the rest of the tree is a graft. So you have Zev Zegorim mutter. Don't tell me Zev Zegorim is Asr. The Tanya Nami Hachi, there's a brisa like this also. Mode Rabbi Yossi agrees, turning to the top of Mem Tes Amud Aleph, Shem Nata Behivrich V'Hirkiv Mutter. So, crystal clear, we see a stira within Rabbi Yossi that our Mishnah seems to say, our Mishnah from over here on Mem Ches Amud Beis seems to say that Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion of Zev Zegorim, that when I have something mutter and something usher that generate a third thing, that Mishnah seems to say it's usher, but that doesn't really work with our Mishnah in Maseches Orla. That's what the Gemara asks. And if you want to say, and the Gemara posits a fascinating svara, that maybe Zev Zegorim has different halachos in different genres of halacha. Says the Gemara, V'chitema, Shani Leila Rabbi Yossi, Bein Sha'ari Isurin LaAvodas Kochavim. If you want to say that maybe Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah is of the opinion that Zev Zegorim is Asr, because we're talking about Avodas Kochavim. But by Maseches Orla, which is Sha'ari Sur, and it's a different type of Isser, perhaps that's mutter. That can happen. That's a very reasonable svara. So the Gemara says maybe Rabbi Yossi, maybe we should be mechalek Rabbi Yossi, split a hair. The Rabbi Yossi only holds that zev v'zeh gorim is aser by avodah zara, but by shi'ari surim like orla it's mutter. Says the Gemara, that can't be 3 lines down. Mishanile, does he make such a distinction? After all, V'hatanya, we have a brisa. Sada shenisdavla bezevel avodas kochavim. If you have a field that has been fertilized with fertilizer of a non-Jew, v'chein para shenis patma, of a cow that got fat, b'karshine avodas kochavim, that was fed with animal feed that belongs to an oved kochavim, machlokes tanaim. Tani chada sada tizara, para tishachad, no problem. You're allowed to plant in the field and you can shech the animal. The Tanya idach sada tavor. You have to bring the field back to fallow. You have to let it just die out like we would in a Shemitah year. Upara terazeh. And the animal that gained weight, you have to bring it back to its original weight before the feed. So that shows you two different approaches. And my lav harab yosi harabanan. These two brisas that are connected to the brisa about the fertilized field, perhaps we should say that when the brisa says sada tizara para tishachet, that is Rabbi Yossi. So says the Gemara, and perhaps the next case of Sadeh, of Tavor, Upara Terazeh, is Rabbanon. And therefore, says the Gemara that it seems like he doesn't make a distinction. So if that's true, says the Gemara, so then, lo, that's not correct. You've learned the Mishnah the wrong way. We're 8 lines down on Mem Tes Amud Aleph. Rather, instead of saying that these two brisas are a machlokas between Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanon, rather we should say Harab Elazar v'Harabanan. Really, what we're saying is that the two different Tanaim that are quoted here, one's Rabbi Elazar, one's the Rabbanan. So the Gemara says, well, if it's Rabbi Elazar and the Rabbanan, that's going to be difficult. Hey, Rabbi Elazar v'Rabbanan. Which machlokas of Rabbi Elazar and the Rabbanan are we talking about? Ilema Rabbi Elazar v'Rabbanan deseor. If you want to say we're talking about the Rabbi Elazar and the Rabbanan in regards to making bread, and what they would do is as follows. We're blessed. You can go to the store and buy a container of yeast. That's not what they did. They actually would take a sourdough and they let it ferment a little bit, and that would then play a role in helping another challah actually swell up, rise. Yeah. Some vocab challenges at 9 o'clock at night. So says the Gemara, if that's what is the Shita Rabbi Elazar and Rabbanan, let's see what that machlokas was. It's not. The Mishnah says in Maseches Psachim, also quoted in Orla and other places, Se'or shel chulin, if the yeast or the sourdough that functions as yeast is not holy, Vishel Truma, and there's another piece that is holy, Shenaflu L'soch Isa, and they fell into a dough, and now together the two of them are causing for the dough to rise. Lo bazek de lechametz, lo bazek de lechametz. Neither piece that fell in, the chulin and the truma, neither piece is significant enough to enable the rising of the dough. B'nitzdarfu v'chimtu. Only the chulin plus the truma can cause for the chimutz, can cause for the leavening of the bread. So here we have our machlokas. Rebbe Lazar Omer achar de acharon aniba. Achar ha'acharon? I have a little line through it. I couldn't see that. Achar ha'acharon aniba. Whichever one gets put in second, that's what I follow. So that means that if the truma gets put in second, then that's a big problem. If the truma gets put in first and the chulin gets put in second, less of a problem. So that's the sheet of Rebbe Lazar. V'chachamim omrim bein shenafal iser mitchila, correction of the text. Bein shenafal iser mitchila, ubein shenafal iser lebesof. It doesn't matter what order things fell in. Say the chachamim back to Rebbe Lazar. Eino oser achi hebok de lechametz. It's not going to be usher until the truma component is big enough to cause for chimutz. The Amar Abaye says as follows: Lo shanu, the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, who says achar ha'acharon aniva, where he says I follow whichever piece of bread fell in last. Lo shanu ela shekadam v'silek esa iser. That's only true if I remove the iser when we have our concluding bread. Aval lo kadam v'silek esa iser aser. But if I left in the truma, then there's no way it's going to be mavatel. Now, look at this case. This is zev gorem, and it's aser, because we have the bread, the sourdough that's being used to leaven, that's chulin. We have the sourdough that's being used to leaven, that's truma. One's mutter, one's aser. So the Gemara says Zev Gorim is Aser. Clearly, Rebbe Lazar holds Zev Gorim is Aser. So perhaps when we're trying to attribute the machlokas and the brisas that we saw above to Rebbe Lazar and the Chachamim, perhaps that is talking about this case over here of the Seor, where Rebbe Lazar holds that Zev Gorim is Aser, and the Chachamim holds Zev Gorim is Mutter. So says the Gemara, I don't know why you're forcing that into Rebbe Lazar. Umimai de taima de Rebbe Lazar kida Abaye. How do we know that the Machmir Shita of Rebbe Lazar, who says that we always follow the latter piece that's put into the dough, how do we know that Abaye is right about the svar of Zev Gorim is Aser? Dilma, perhaps, Taima de Rebbe Lazar mishum de achar achron aniva, that because he's following simply the last piece. Whatever piece goes in last is what the gorim is for the iser. I gamer be'isura asura, I gamer beheteru mutarin, bein salke uvein lo salke. Abaye made an assumption that we were talking about a case scenario where we removed the iser or didn't remove the iser. But perhaps Rebbe Lazar doesn't hold that way. Maybe Rebbe Lazar doesn't care if you remove the iser, and really he holds Zev Gorim as mutter. That's possible. We don't know that Abaye is right. And therefore, the Gemara says, you're 100% right. If we're going to say that the machlokas above is Rebbe Lazar and the Rabbanan, we can't say that it's drawn from the machlokas of Rebbe Lazar and the Rabbanan by Seor. And we need to therefore find another Mari Makom. Halfway down on Mem Tesamid Aleph, Ela Rebbe Lazar v'Rabbanan de Eitzim. Rather, we're talking about another case of a machlokas between Rebbe Lazar and the Rabbanan about a tree. That's not. Natal Hemena Eitzim Asura Behana. If you take wood from this tree, it'll be Asur Behana. We're talking about Asherah. Now let's say I took wood and I put it inside of an oven. Hisig Satanur. All right, that's not how our ovens are made. But let's say you had a wood-based oven, and the wood that you put in and that you lit on fire was from an Asherah. So the Gemara, the Mishnah makes a chiluk. If the oven was chadash, if the oven was new, so the first time that you heat up a new oven, that's like the makeh b'patish of their ovens. The heat makes the oven complete, and therefore yutatz. The only way to kasher that oven is to break it apart and start all over again. You can't undo that. The Asherah wood was used as makeh b'patish. You were neheneh from the Asherah. You're not allowed to do that. Yashan, however, if the oven was an old oven, it had been cooked in before, and then you use some Asherah wood, then yutzan, all you have to do is wait for it to cool down, and that would be considered okay. Now, next, afa boas apas, let's say that I cooked bread inside this oven with Asherah wood, asura behana, obviously. Nis'arva be'acherim, if the piece of bread that I made with an Asherah piece of wood, got mixed up with other loaves of bread, kulan asuros behana. We have no bittel by Avodah Zara. There's no batel b'shishim, there's no batel b'elef. We just had a shiur in my house yesterday because my children clearly don't know what fleishiks and milchiks are. And my son took a fleishik ladle, and he took a fleishik bowl, and he took soup out from a milchik pot that had soup in it. The soup wasn't directly milchik, but it had onions in it that were cut with a milchik knife. So this was the shiloh that my wife asked me last night. So we had bittul, so it was okay because it was batal b'shishim. Whatever he did was batal b'shishim. It was eino benyon. We had a lot of reasons to be mekel. To make matters more complicated, my wife had stirred this soup, which really was betzem milchik. She stirred it with a spoon that had just come out of a very hot frying pan, in which she had boiled some fettuccine cream sauce. That's mamish milchik d'oraisa. So she stirred the spoons with milchik, so the fettuccine alfredo. She quickly cleaned it off and then used it to stir the soup. That's ben yomo. That's mamish ben yomo. That was used a second ago on boiling hot cheese. So now we had a double layer bittul. Like, there is no bittul by Avodah Zarah. There's bittul by Yidden. And by the way, there's bittul by Goyim in general. We rely on Goyim for bittul all the time. Sometimes the things that makes scotch, the color, very fluid, What they use is a glycerin, and they're not always kosher. That's okay. We rely on goyim to do bittul. But by a yid, ein mevat l'nisr lechatchila. I can't cause bittul, but a goy can cause bittul. But avodah zara never has bittul. So, anyways, the food was all fine. Everything came out okay. And my son still doesn't know where the milchik drawer is. Separate issue, unrelated. But that's what's happening over here. The Gemara says that isarva be'acherim, we're 2/3 of the way down, then kulan asuros behana. This is the shita of the Rabbana. Rebbe Lazar Omer, yolich hana liyam hamelach. He says that you're definitely not allowed to benefit from this at all, and you need to throw it out. So now we have zev gorem. We have an oven that's kosher. We have wood that's not kosher. And he's saying, get rid of it. Zev gorem is awesome. So therefore, maybe this is the source of the machlokas of Rabbi Lazar and the Chachamim of zev gorem. And Amrulo, what did the rabbis say back to him? Ein pidyon la'avodas kochavim. You can't do that. So perhaps that's the case. And the Gemara says, well, wait 1 second. Rabbana de pligi alei de Rabbi Lazar, man ninhu. This shita that we just saw of ein podin la'avodas kochavim, this is a Mishnah we're going to see on the next page. The Chachamim who hold that way, who are they? Ilema Rabbanan de eitzim. If you want to say it's the Rabbi Lazar from the Mishnah we saw 7 or 8 lines ago, of notal heimena eitzim asura behana achmure machmire. There, we were much more machmir. And Ella, if you want to say it's Rabbanan de seor, that really the Rabbanan that we just learned about is from the Rabbanan that we saw 10 lines down in the Mishnah from Maseches Psachim in the Mishnah from Orla about Seor, Eimar de Shamasle, Luhula Rabbanan de Mekile be Seor. Maybe the rabbis were only Mekel by Seor, but Bavodas Kochavim me Mekile. So therefore, we tried to say that perhaps the machlokes above wasn't about Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan. We said maybe it was about Rabbi Lazar and the Rabbanan, and that took the heat off of Rabbi Yossi. So then the Gemara says, sorry, you can't say it's Rabbi Lazar because we don't have a Mari Makom that indicates that Rabbi Lazar actually holds the way that you're saying he holds. So the brisa that we learned at the top of Sadash and Istabla on the 3rd line down, you wanted to say that was Rabbi Lazar and the Chachamim. No, it's not Rabbi Lazar and the Chachamim. So let's look where we are now. We're 3/4, 4/5 of the way down. Elala Olam, Hareb Yosi v'Harabanan. Those 2 brises that we learned above, where when one fertilized the field with Avodas Kochavim, and we saw machlokes about it, one said the field is fine, one said the field should lay fallow. Really, it is a machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan. But why is it not a problem to say that Rabbi Yossi holds that Zev Gorem is Aser? Because Rabbi Yossi was not talking about his own Shita. Rabbi Yossi l'divrem de Rabbanan ka'amar. That's the appropriate language here. Amar lehu lididi Zev Gorem mutter. In such a case, I'd be lenient. But lididchu, according to you, de amrisu Zev Gorem Aser, oduli mihas afi rakos b'mosag shamim. So that was the way that we would appropriately understand our Mishnah. We said, how can you say that Rabbi Yossi would hold Zev Gorim is Aser? We wouldn't. We would say that it's Mutter. How did the rabbis explain themselves? Rabbanan, Kida Amar Rav Mari Berei Rav Kahana. That would be the same thing we saw on the bottom of Mem Chesem and Beis, that the Rabbanan were of the opinion that the leaf fell, but it was offset by the shade, and therefore it is not going to be problematic. Amar Rab Shmuel. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halacha ki Rabbi Yossi. We seem to paskin like Rabbi Yossi. Let's tell a quick story, 4 lines from the bottom. Hahu ginta, or ginsa. I don't know if there's a tough or a suf, I'm not sure. Hahu gin, probably ginsa. Hahu ginsa, the izdavil bezavla davodas kochavim. There was a field that was fertilized with the fertilizer of an oved kochavim. Shalach Rav Amram kamid Rav Yosef. Rav Amram brought the shaila to Rav Yosef. There's an added language here in the Gemara of ki hai gavna mai, because our Gemara doesn't say that he posed a question. It's implied, but the Gemara does have this addition on the side based on old kisveyad. Amar le, Rav Yosef said back to Rav Amram, Hachi Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, halacha ki Rav Yossi. That's taka how we paskin like Rav Yossi. Very good. That brings us to a new Mishnah on the top of Daf Mem Tesamud Beis. The way things are going, we probably won't get past the parak. I may have to record a daf tomorrow morning just to catch us up because there's way too much material. I also added 15 minutes to Daf Yomi on Shabbos. Normally, we will learn Daf Yomi an hour before Mincha. I just padded an extra 15 minutes because we really need some time to catch up. No sighs from the crowd, please, okay? Just you're not the one who has to prepare it. You just have to sit there.
I've
It's
got
good.
4 kids that I gotta leave.
You've got one wife that you need to leave, is really what it is. I know how this works, yes. Daddy has to learn Torah. That's I'm trust me, I've been there. I couldn't have done this when I was in your stage of life. So,
Yeah.
okay, says the Gemara, Masnisen, not tamimena eitzim asurim behana. This we just saw that if I take wood from an Asherah tree, it's usher to benefit from. Hisik bahenes atanarim chadash yutat vim yashan yutzan, as we saw, that if it's used to heat up an oven, if it's the first time that the oven was heated up, then the oven has to be destroyed because it's baked into the walls, quite literally, and it's usher, you have to destroy it. Vim yashan yutzan, and if it's been used already, and now you heat it up with an Asherah tree, with Asherah wood, then yutzan, you just have to let it cool down. Now, b'di'evet afa bahenes apas, if in fact you already baked the bread with the Asherah wood, Asura behana, that's not allowed because that's mamash a problem. Nis'arva be'acheros, and if it got mixed up with others, if it got mixed up with other chalas, so then the halacha is kulan asuros behana because there is no bittul as we spoke about. Rabbi Lazar Omer yolech hana liyam melach. Rabbi Lazar said you need to throw the equivalent of the dollars into the Yam HaMelech. That would be the appropriate move. Amrlo and ein pidyon la'avodas kochavim. End of the first part of the Mishnah. Natal mimena charkor. Let's say you took something that was an Asherah tree and it functioned as a charkor, which was a tool that was used to separate threads in a loom or in a weave. I have a mental block around all these things, like the whole weave and like that machine.
Weave and warp.
Yeah, woof and warp. See, that's as much as I know, though. I can picture it because I saw a movie with a whoop and a wharf once, but that's about it. Like the thing goes in between. No, I don't think any women are either, frankly, not in our era, not anymore. My mother, my grandmother for sure knows. My great grandmother used to use that. Anyways, you take out this basically probably looks like a pencil of sorts that's pointy to help you separate threads. So it says the Gemara, Natal himena charkor aser be'ana oragbo es habeged. If after using the charkor you wove together a garment aser be'ana, if that garment was nisar be'acherim ve'acherim be'acherim, which is interesting, we added acherim be'acherim to the second part of the Mishnah, but not the first. And take a look at if you have the Hagos V'Tzionim on the side. I have those V'Hadar here. The Hagos V'Tzionim on the side says LeRabbeinu Tam Sheviu Atosvos Le'el Gam Hocha Lo Goras V'Acherim V'Acherim V'Chein Kasav L'Hedje B'Zvachim. It doesn't make sense to say that over here. Let's read the line again. That if it's Arag Boas Habeged Aser Ba'ana and then Nis'arid Ba'acherim, if it gets mixed up into others, and then one of those others is ve'acherim ba'acherim. So that these two words are actually gone. It's only one ve'acherim, and then the words ve'acherim l'chora are probably removed. So then says the Gemara, kulan asurim be'ana. Rabbi Lazar Omer yolechana liyam hamelach amrulo ein podin la'avodas ein pidyon la'avodas kochem. So we see two cases that are very, very similar. Let's call them out. The first case is where you use wood and you use it to either heat up an oven and or to bake a food. And the second is using this charkor, this tool. So our Gemara wants to know, why do I need two cases that are nearly identical? V'tzricha. Di'i ashmuinun kamaisa. If I only had the first case of natal mimena eitzim, v'haka amar Rabbi Eliezer, there Rabbi Eliezer held what he held of yolech hana liyam hamelach. Why? Mishum debeidna de kagamra pas kalila yisura. He was happy to be more lenient because the Asherah tree that he used in order to heat up the oven, where is it now? It's gone. It's consumed. There's nothing left. So that's why he might have been lenient. Aval charkor, but this tool that you use from an Asherah tree, the isei isura be'ene, I still see the tool. It's right in front of me. Didn't burn it up. Ema modi l'rabbanan. Maybe he'll be more machmir. That's why he holds that we need both cases. V'i ashmin and charkor. And if you want to say that we would have only had the second case of the Mishnah of this tool that was to be used, the charkor. So if that's true, says the Gemara, then the haka amre rabbanon, there the rabbis are going to be machmir. Aval pas ema module Rabbi Eliezer, but perhaps they would agree to Rabbi Eliezer in the other case. Therefore, tzricha, we needed both cases in order not to have any confusion. All of that is part one of our Gemara. We're a third of the way down on Mem Testament Beis. At this point, we'll probably just stop at the end of the parak. As you can tell, it's a thicker Gemara to get through. It's like each line requires time, so just can't move quite as quickly. Amar Rav Chia Bereda Rabba Bar Nachmeni, Amar Rav Chizda, Amar Zeiri, Halacha Karabi Eliezer. We follow like Rabbi Eliezer, which is the lenient opinion that you can just give away or dump into the Yam HaMelach, the equivalent, and then save the item. Ika de Amre, some say, and this doesn't change anything halachically, but it's important to know who said what. Kol Omer Davar B'Shem Omram Mevinas HaGeula. So Amar Rav Chizda Amar Li Abba Bar Rav Chizda Hachi Amar Zeiri Halachik Rabbi Eliezer. Nothing changes. Same din, just different statements, different authorship. Next part of the Gemara. Amar Rav Ada Bar Ava Lo Shanu Elapas. Our Mishnah is only talking about bread. Aval Chavis. But if we were dealing with a chavis that had this issue, we would not say by Rebbe Lazar that you can just take the cash equivalent of the chavis and throw it to Yam HaMelach and save the chavis. For Rav Chizda Amar, afilu chavis muteris, you're allowed to do that as well, no problem at all. Ha'ugavra, there was a man, there was a man who mixed up a barrel of yain nesech with his wine. Asa lekame de Rav Chizda, a couple of lines ago, Rav Chizda was matir. Amar, no problem. Shkol ar bazuze v'shade v'nara v'nishtar lach. Whatever the Gemara just takes the number of 4. Whatever the cost was of the barrel that was the yain nesech, take that amount of money, throw it into the Yam HaMelach. You don't know what's what, and then you're good to go. We don't really do that nowadays, but that is what the Gemara says.
That's actually, I messed up, not just as we would can. Yeah, I know it, yeah, so
But it's mixed up with other barrels.
we never had that. Actually, I messed up, you do, the wood that created the bread, that you do the cash.
Step removed. But the point is that it's all Asr B'Hana. So the Isser Hana, we can extend over here to Yain Nesech. I agree that this is way more direct. It's not the Asherah, but it's the bread that was cooked by the Asherah, the oven that was cooked by. I agree to that distinction. That's a beautiful distinction. I didn't notice that when I was learning it. But what's common, your question's better than my answer, but what's common about them is that we're talking about removing an Isser Hana. And in both cases, Rav Chizda holds you can remove the Isser Hana by being Zorek Li Yam HaMelach. But that's a beautiful catch. I didn't see that. I was learning this. So Asa L'Kamid Rav Chizda, he said, throw it out, no problem. Next Mishnah. Ketzad Mevatla. How would it be that a goy could be mevatel in Avodah Zara? Remember that Yidden cannot be mevatel Avodah Zara, but a goy can. It's just so interesting. You know, we have this principle in halacha called mi'i kamidi. Is there a case scenario where a goy has a higher level of function in halacha than a yid? That really doesn't really happen so much. Usually a goy has way more halachos and way more latitude in halacha. So that's just not true. It's not true over here. Here we see that who can do the bittul of the Avodah Zarah? Only a goy. It is somewhat counterintuitive. It's clear. I mean, we're wrong clearly, but I'm just saying the Balabatisha reaction for me was that's it's a little backwards, but it is in fact the din. I'll have to get that later. Don't worry, I don't need it. So it says the Gemara, Ketzad Mevatla. Oh, I found it anyways. Ketzad Mevatla. How does a goy nullify an avodah zara? So kirsam v'zired, if he does any trimming or if he does any pruning of a particular asherah tree, so that's one way. Natal mimena makel, if he breaks off a branch that functions as a walking stick for him. O sharbit, as a scepter of some kind. Afilu Allah, even if he takes a leaf or something like that. Hareze batla. Why? What is he showing when he does that? He's not treating it like an Asherah tree. So once the goy treats the tree not like an Asherah tree, it's batal. If I break off a branch, if a goy breaks off a branch from an Asherah tree and he uses it as a walking stick, done. It's not an Asherah anymore. Why? Because klape him, it's no longer kadosh. All he had to do was use it for another thing. If he put his hammock up there, you're done. It's not an Asherah tree anymore. That's not avoda. You're resting in the shade. Mamish. And a diuk of the kavanah.
Yeah.
Because he's not even saying hareni mevatel asher zu. You know, all he's doing is he's doing something mechanical. But that thing that he does when he breaks off a branch because he's limping, that's a gilui milsa, that it's no longer an asherah by him. So his kavanah determines whether or not this is an Asherah tree. Shifa, what if if the tree was like sanded down or shaved down, some kind of some type of work like if it was Shifa. So says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, Litzorcha, if you're doing it to shape the tree, to beautify the tree, to carve the name of the Avodah Zara in the tree, Asura. But Shalol Litzorcha Mutaris, if you're doing it because you need sawdust, well, guess what? It's not an Asherah tree anymore. It's like our principle of malacha she'eina tzricha legufan halacha. I'm digging a hole, not because I want a hole, but I'm digging a hole because I want the dirt. So here, I'm sanding the tree, not because the tree needs it, but because I need the sand. Oh, yeah, I mean, I need the sawdust. That means it's not an Asherah tree anymore. Once the goy interacts with the tree in a way which isn't Avodah Zarah-esque, then it is no longer Avodah Zarah. That's how we do bittul, end of Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Osan Shvain, what about the sawdust itself? Matahei Alehan. I understand that if you take off the sawdust, and if in fact, let's say it was done l'tzorka, that the tree is still an Asherah, what about the sawdust? Pligi bar Rav Huna, v'Rav Chia bar Rav. Chad amar asurin, v'chad amar mutarin. Some say that the sawdust is not allowed, some say that it is. Tanya commanda amar mutarin. Some say that the sawdust is allowed. The Tanya. Ovid kochavim sheshifa, avodas kochavim. If there was an Oved Kochavim who shaved down that which was Avodas Kochavim, a tree, an Asherah in this case, Litzorcho, if he did it for himself, meaning it's no longer an Asherah. Therefore, because it's no longer an Asherah, he ushva'eha mutarin. No problem. The tree is not an Asherah, and the sawdust is not an Asherah. He was Megala Milsa, that he doesn't want this to be an Asherah anymore. Guess what? It's no longer an Asherah, it's magic. Litzorka, if the reason he did the sanding on the tree was in order to shape the tree, to do something for the avodah of the Asherah, then he asura ushva'eha mutarin. Look at that. You see the split? The shva'eha are still mutar. Because your service was to the tree. This is no longer a part of the tree. That's interesting. That requires work. We're not going to focus on that. V'Yisrael sheshifa ovedas kochavim, avodas kochavim. If a Jew sanded down a tree, bein letzorka, bein letzorko, he ushva'eha asurin. The yid, you can't be mevatel anything. It has to stay asherah until a goy is mevatel. Itmar, avodas kochavim shenishtabra. Let's say that there was an idol that broke. Rav amar tzarich levatel kol kisim v'kisim. I don't care if it broke. Rav says you have to be mevatel every individual piece. Ushmuel amar avodas kochavim eina b'teila el derech dilasa. It can only be mevatel the way it was grown. Says the Gemara, the way it's grown. Adarabba derech dilasa mi mevatla. If it's growing that way, there's no way to be mevatel it. The Gemara gives a more sophisticated svara as to what Shmuel was saying. Ein avodas kochavim tzricha levatel ela derech gedilasa. This is what the Gemara means, that we only need bittul if the Avodah Zara falls apart in a natural way. If it falls apart in an unnatural way, you don't need bittul. Lema b'hakamiflagi. Maybe this machlokas Rav and Shmuel is connected to the following. I'm sorry, we're going to push a little bit. I just want to get to the parak. Demar savar ovdin l'shvarin. One person holds that a goy would worship even broken pieces of a pesel. Umar savar ein ovdin l'shvarin. That once it's broken, he would not worship those small little pieces. That's a personality type. I would never, if something's broken, I throw it out. It loses its chashivas. Says the Gemara, lo, that's not what Rav and Shmuel are arguing about. Tekule alma ovdin l'shvar. Every akum is going to worship their idol, even if it breaks into pieces. We're not talking about a broken piece. We're talking about when the broken piece breaks into broken pieces. Marsavar shivrei shvarim asurin. One shita holds that the broken pieces of the broken piece are asur. Marsavar shivrei shvarim mutarin. That might be the machlokas Rav and Shmuel, where Rav is the machmer and Shmuel is the mekel. Maybe everybody holds. Rav and Shmuel both hold that which is broken, and when it breaks more, everybody holds its mutter. We're talking about a type of thing that, like, it's a type of avodah zarah that's made out of pieces that can be reconnected. Legos was the example that Rabbi Rosner gave, which is not Rabbi Rosner, Rabbi Resnick. It's a beautiful mashal. They build a deity out of their Legos, and then it falls apart. Mar Savar, that the Kevan Dehedyot Yachal Achzir Lo Batla, that since the average person is able to be Machzir, is able to put back the Avodah Zara, so therefore it's not Batla, it's easy to put back together. Umar Savar Ein Avodas Kochav Batla Ela Derech Delasa. The only time it's going to be batel is if it can't be put back together easily. And lav delasi. This is not how it's built, but therefore be'ain tzricha levatel because it's made out of chulios, and that could be that's their machlokas. Hadron alach kol atzlam. Baruch Hashem. We finished the third parak of Maseches Avodah Zara. We'll stop here. Wishing you all a beautiful night.